David Cunliffe.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I have to say I was enjoying the contribution of my colleague, and I'll pick up where he left off. Mr. Speaker, members opposite seem to be disputing the question of whether this is in fact a tax. It is proper for us to address that question in the debate on Clause 1 in this committee stage, because that contains the title of the Telecommunications Development Levy. The fact that it's a tax is, I think, quite plain. It is a cost which is imposed on members of the public through this instrument that applies through the companies concerned. And we have statements out today from Spark, the old Telecom New Zealand, which makes clear, uses language about a tax, makes clear that they're going to have to pass it on to their customers, and what's more, that they're looking at doing so with an explicit splitting out in everybody's phone bill so they can see what this extra tax is. So this is an extra tax, and it'll be shown on people's phone bills. That's a statement from Spark, and I think members of the public and colleagues know that I've had cause in the past to take issue with some of the old Telecom New Zealand statements, and so I don't give them a soft run, but I'll take them at their word for that. And if that wasn't good enough for people, let us turn to the statement published Friday the 22nd of May today on the Telecommunications Carriers Forum. This is the industry body. It's not one company pushing its own barrow. This is the forum of all the players, and they talk about this being unnecessary to pass under urgency in order to tax the industry. This is quoting from them. This is the industry body. The industry body is calling it a tax, and I quote, "The bill extends a tax which to date has not been explicitly recovered from consumers. However, the industry cannot continue to absorb ongoing costs of this magnitude." Now, the next question which arises, members' office have said, look, we don't need a select committee process because there's nothing new, Mr. Chairman, in this. Well, what is new, and I think Mr. Muta, the CEO of Spark, makes the point very clearly, is that the original tax was a one-off to support the development of ultra-fast broadband through the Rural Broadband Initiative. It was time-limited, and the downsizing of those taxes was legislated for in the formal bill. So to change the law is in fact a change, because under the continuous disclosure rules of the stock market, the companies concerned have to build that into their forecast. That has to be notified to the exchange and made public. So if Parliament wants to override, people will see the irony of me having to set this out for members opposite, override those private property rights which are enshrined in the Securities Act, then we are using legislation to do it. Therefore, something is definitely changing. We are overriding legal rights.
And it's a big deal.
So what then is the proper framework of objectives to consider the questions? I want to commend our Green colleagues for the list that they've come up with, and I'm going to refer to that again. But let me just set out for the public what are Labour's goals here when we look at this type of policy issue. Well, the first one is, and I think reminds me of the old digital strategy with the 3 Cs. We want great connectivity for all New Zealanders. To be frank, we want faster, cheaper broadband wherever you are in New Zealand. We support the goal, that I think every member of this House does, is that broadband ought to be ubiquitous and available anywhere in New Zealand, and that the whole country benefits from the fact that everybody is on the network. You can ring people up, their phone numbers are in the phone book, or they're on the net, or what have you. Nobody's left out, and the whole country benefits. So that's the first goal, faster, cheaper, ubiquitous connection. But it leaves open the question, is this the right instrument? Is this helping? How would you know? There's been no evaluation done. Second one is user capability. We are opposed to digital divides. We abhor the digital divide, which is an income-related divide, where about a third of households, low-income households, don't have fast broadband access, and that impedes children's learning and all sorts of things, access to government services. We want every New Zealander to have access to the net at speeds that they can use. We also are concerned about the rural-urban divide, and we know that there has to be a technology mix, starting off with fibre in the backhaul, out to perhaps ADSL copper or VDSL or whatever else is the current flavour of technology, and then out to mobile, and then out to satellite, or perhaps Project Loon will bear fruit and we'll have a mesh network of balloons. Who knows? The technology frontier will shift. But that is the point, Mr. Chairman. Because the technology frontier is shifting, because the technology is changing, it is prudent and proper for the government of the day, Mr. Chairman, in midstream here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is really important for the government of the day to carry out a proper analysis on how the tax has been operating before imposing a new tax over the top of it. And that brings us, of course, to the third C, the content. We want a vibrant content environment. We want there to be competitive conditions online so that New Zealanders can access the content that they need and they want in the cheapest possible terms. So those are the goals. What questions arise? Well, I'm just going to come back to Mr. Shaw's list. I think it's a really good one. Will these taxes be passed through to consumers? Well, we have the industry body and one of the largest players saying they will, so that is at the very least a very important and open question. Secondly, what about the quality of connections? There are two issues. There's a technical sufficiency argument and there's a benefit flow argument. Who gets what? They need to be answered. Third issue, has there been sufficient evaluation and reporting? Well, there clearly hasn't been, because there isn't a proper regulatory impact statement and there hasn't been an options analysis done by official. Fourthly, what do we know about disruptive technologies? I mentioned Project Loon. There could be others. The point is, who would know? The government hasn't done the work. 5, will companies have 2 bites of the cherry? Are they under existing obligations? I don't know, we don't know, the public doesn't know, but that's a very important question, because we are opposed to companies double dipping. If they are contractually bound because they have concessional terms under a previous spectrum licence auction, then we shouldn't be making New Zealanders pay twice by imposing a new tax on them, especially not under urgency in the dead of night. Was the process proper? Well, clearly it was not. There hasn't been an options analysis done. There hasn't been a RIS done. Why should seeking funding from policy have been designed in this way? Was the cart before the horse? It looks like it was. To answer that question, Mr. Chairman, we turn to the OECD, to their Telecommunications Policy Unit, and a very major report on telecommunications development obligations, or levies, which was published in 2012, widely regarded at the time as the gospel. And it sets out the following questions, which it's just a shame the government hasn't apparently addressed. Firstly, define the specific features of the service under consideration. Determine whether the service is essential for full participation in society and therefore in the public interest. 3, establish if market mechanisms are insufficient or if sufficient services are available. 4, assess the options of imposing a universal service obligation relative to other alternatives. Note, that hasn't happened in this case. 5, evaluate policy alternatives in light of the broader policy objectives and other ongoing programs. Well, that hasn't happened either. What are the criteria that an evaluation should take care of? Page 24 of the OECD study. Parsimony, sufficiency, neutrality, focus, adaptability, predictability, accountability and effectiveness. Quite a long list, Mr. Chairman. The OECD's done a lot of work. Well, what are they saying? Turn to page 27. At present, revising universal service policies to include service from any location, and I quote, may not be feasible in all OECD countries. Goes on to say that those with high population density like Korea will have no problem. Those with low population density like Sweden, Australia or New Zealand may well have a problem, and the issue of a USO is a very pertinent issue to be evaluated and raised. There is certainly, in terms of the OECD's work, no case for an automatic rollover. This is highly contentious stuff. What issues arise? Well, what they name is cost relative to benefits. In large countries with large, unpopulated or sparsely populated areas like the South Island of New Zealand, the costs of providing access for any location would exceed the benefits. How much is too much? How far away is too far away? We're never going to run a fat fibre pipe to Mount Cook. There aren't enough people there. But we might want to use mobile broadband or satellite or loon, who knows? The point is the work hasn't been done and the public doesn't get access to that information. What are the range of services to be provided, asked the OECD. What's the impact on competition of imposing a TDO? What impact on quality of service? What about the affordability of the service if the tax is passed on to the consumer? What about technical issues like emergency services and social tariffs, and so on and so forth? And then on page 31, the OECD conclude. Mr. Chairman.
I call the Honourable Amy Adams.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Given that the